Good morning. My name is Justin Swan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Cascade Community Foundation, and I want to welcome you to our community Q&A. For our first episode, we're discussing the topic of race, and I want to thank you for being here. You're joining over 100 people who have registered for this very important discussion that we're having, and we hope at Cascade Community Foundation this is something that we can continue to deliver. So we hope you enjoy this. I'm going to turn to a couple of guests that we've brought in here before our panel, which will come in a few minutes. But I'll start with Ken James. Ken, you are the Director of Inclusion.
I am Director of Inclusion with the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce. I'm also a Cascade resident, what I have been for the last 12 years, me and my family. And then also I'm on the board for the Cascade Community Foundation.
And talk to me a little bit about that. You joined the board earlier this year, but I got the impression that there was something more you wanted to do. So talk a little bit about why you came on board.
Absolutely. So, my discussion with the Cascade Community Foundation started toward the end of 2019, and my official appointment became official in January of 2020. But one of the things that I wanted to do was, I do a lot of work in the metropolitan Grand Rapids area, but most of my focus was in downtown Grand Rapids. And I always thought it was a good time to marriage what I do in what you call the metro Grand Rapids area to where I live. And so I wanted those two things to come together. And I thought one opportunity to do that would be through working with the Cascade Community Foundation.
Excellent. Ken, you are very involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're going to be on our panel later, so I don't want to give it all away right now, but give us a little bit of an idea of why you felt like this was an important topic to bring to the forefront here in Cascade, Ada, Forest Hills, the area that the foundation serves.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was seeing, just from my viewpoint, is the country was in two pandemics. We had obviously the health pandemic with COVID-19, and then after the passing of George Floyd, I saw a lot of discussion around systemic racism and what that meant. And then if you think about what I do professionally, those things were coming together because I was getting conversations from individuals saying, help me understand, and fill in the blank, Black Lives Matter. Help me understand what is so much energy around the systemic racism movement. And then it didn't take long for that to kind of trickle out of my work life also into my family life, because these things were conversations that were also starting to take place in my neighborhood, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in just a moment. Yeah.
And so let me introduce Richard Robbins. Richard, you grew up in the Detroit suburbs. You've raised now 3 adult children that are out of the house. But you're still living in Cascade, and at one point or another this past spring you woke up and something was tugging on your heartstrings a little bit. Talk a little bit about those moments, that emotion you were feeling and what was going on.
Sure, Justin. So I've a little bit of a product of the 60s. I was only 10 years old when the race riots occurred but it affected my family because my parents were very in tune with racial issues, and all through my life I felt as though there's something that's just not right. And so I've been working hard as a father and as a community participant for many years, but I really didn't. It really didn't hit me until a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement and also George Floyd. And so at that time, I turned to my wife, Barbara, and I said, Barbara, we have to do something different. This just isn't right. And so I said, Barbara, we've got this wonderful neighbor down the street, Ken and Tamasha James, people of color, and we've never invited them to our house for dinner. Why? Why is that? And not for any lack of interest. It's just I've been working, you're busy in your life, as all of us are in our communities. We're busy, we're heads down, we're doing a lot of good things, but missing that whole element. And so I actually called Ken. I said, Ken, how about if you come over and we'll have a beer on the back porch, and I'd like to talk to you about something that's been bothering me. And so we got together and sat and had a discussion about my concerns and the fact that I just feel like I have to do something. I have to do something. I have to be an agent of positive change. This isn't about me. This is about wanting to move forward, a community forward. And so Ken and then we had a subsequent discussion with the four of us, Ken and I and our wives, Barbara and Tamasha, and just came up with an action plan. And fortunately, in Ken's position where he's at, everything kind of came together. And then that's how we also met you, and things have kind of come together very nicely.
You used some specific words when we were initially talking that woke me up to this. You used the words ashamed and embarrassed. Where did that come from? And specific to the topic of race, and specific to the topic of race in these predominantly white suburbs of Ada, Cascade, Forest Hills that we live in. Touch on that a little bit.
Well, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to the fact that I've not been involved sooner. I haven't stepped forward in a leadership position and done something. And so that was what was tugging at my heart. And so that was really what kind of drove it, if you will.
Yeah. And I don't think what Richard is experiencing is dissimilar from what a lot of people in our community are experiencing. And I think where the difference is that you've kind of finally said enough is enough, right? And stepped up and said, I'm going to start initiating and taking steps. We know where you see this going to some degree, but I'm going to turn it to Ken and ask you the question that I would ordinarily ask Richard here. Where do you see a community Q&A like what Cascade Community Foundation is bringing right now on the topic of race in the suburbs? Ken, where do you see that going as a black man in this area?
What I think, and these are my opinions, but I think we will all find some commonality, is one, I'm a firm believer that familiarity brings about awareness. So the more we get to know each other, the more we're just aware of certain things. And then also, I think we're in a place now where silence is no longer acceptable. People are just saying, you know what, let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about what pains us, and then we can start looking at what got here, how we got here, excuse me. And so one of the things that I have decided to do, and that's why I said the same reason I'm part of the Cascade Community Foundation, is I want to be more proximate. So Richard and I live in the same neighborhood, and I would say we had a good relationship, but how come we haven't gone a step further? No real reason, we're all busy, and so I can be as proximate and be a part of the solution as well, and to say, you know, it's okay just to have those interactions, and so to have a discussion right now while things are peaking in this country, they're revolving around race, which can be a sensitive topic. You know, how do we just tear down some of those barriers where it doesn't have to be the elephant in the room type feeling? It just be, hey, you know, we let's find where the commonality, we can appreciate each other's differences and just look at it as, okay, that's a different way of perceiving something or doing something, but still find that commonality.
Richard, Ken used a really good word there, proximity. You've taken some steps with a couple groups you're involved in. Can you talk a little bit about what your outreach over the last couple of weeks to invite people into this discussion have been like? What are some of the responses you've received?
So this idea of proximity is important because I think for all of us and what we're really doing here, for all of us, it's to start on the journey through understanding. Our first piece is understanding. Let's understand what is the discussion point and what are some of the issues. I've reached out to several groups within our community, both associations that I'm a part of, as well as community groups. And what I've really heard is an echoing of that. It's that I feel it too. I feel that there's something that we all have to be doing better. I'm just not sure what the next steps are. And we're not going to solve that here in this session. This is an understanding session, and we might have several more that take place. But at some point, we as a group, as a community, have to come up with some very salient points of direction and movement, of positive direction and action to address racism in not just the suburbs, but in our world. And so that's what I think I heard from many of those groups is, I know I want to do something, but I can't figure out what it is yet. That's okay. Let's first everyone get on the same level and understand, and then let's move forward from there. But I heard an overwhelming amount of support for this kind of a dialogue, and so I'm very encouraged.
Gentlemen, anything to add before we move on to the panel discussion?
I appreciate the opportunity. I view myself as being part of the solution. I agree with Richard. You're not going to solve it all in one session, but taking a step in the right direction, I think, is progress. And I would just to reiterate, this is just a learning opportunity for all of us. Anything, the preconceived notion someone may have about politicalizing this conversation or some sort of hidden agenda, that's not it. We're just talking about how can we all be better neighbors.
That's exactly right. And I guess my parting point is Ken and Tamasha and his wonderful family are going to be over to our house for dinner a couple of times here in the near future, and we're going to start the dialogue. Because it's the dialogue not just with the adults, it's with the children, it's with all of us together, trying to figure out how we can address this in a sustainable, long-term approach.
Well, thank you both for being here. Ken, you're going to stick around. We're going to be back in just a few seconds with our panel, Omar Hall, Abbey Fowler, and of course Ken James. Please stick around. We've got more to talk about with our panel around the issue of race in the suburbs. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Community Q&A. Once again, I'm Justin Swan, the Chief Executive Officer of Cascade Community Foundation. We're happy to have you here. You're one of 100 people who are joining us, over 100 people who are joining us today for Race in the Suburbs, our first topic as part of our Community Q&A series. We're joined now with a panel, but I want to lay the land a little bit about what we're doing. Community Q&A was really put together all about being a pinprick to the heart of some of the issues that predominantly go unsaid. For us, our focus is on the suburbs of Grand Rapids, of Ada, Cascade, and the greater Forest Hills area. A lot of our focus during the Community Q&A series that we're launching will be around these areas and some of the issues that we're facing. Race has obviously come up a lot, both in the news, in politics, in many different mediums over the last 2-3 months. I want to set the tone right now to let you know that this is a judgment-free area. It's apolitical. This is a safe space, and we do that in a couple of ways. We've asked this community to submit questions to us around the topic of race. The purpose of these questions is so that individuals in our community can start to get over some of the initial trepidations and get out there some of the questions that they've been harboring for perhaps a number of years. For us, the most important thing of this is protecting everybody's safety and also getting as much truth and questions out there so that we can open up this very important dialogue. In order to foster that, what we've done is put together an anonymous question portal. So today I have for you 21 separate questions. We're going to do our best to get to all of them. 100% of these questions have been submitted by residents, workers, or business owners from the Ada, Cascade, Forest Hills area. If you do not hear an answer to your question, we are going to be submitting a PDF with those answers written out for you so that everybody can get the truth that they're seeking. There's one predominant question that underlines this entire conversation about our first episode, Race in the Suburbs, and what is it like for a person of color to live in this community? This community is 90+% white. It's a very affluent community. It's a very educated community. It's a very wealthy community. So it lends to the topic and to the discussion very important things about how can we move in the correct direction in the best possible way by opening up and having discussion. and that's what we're here for today. And so without further ado, I'm going to start to introduce our panel. Ken James, who many of you saw in the pre-show. Ken, you are the Director of Inclusion at Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce.
That is correct. So Ken James, I am the Director of Inclusion with the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce. I live in Cascade, have for the last 12 years. Married with 3 daughters, and they are going into the 8th, 9th, and 10th grade respectively this fall, and they are attending Forest Hills Northern.
Wonderful. Abbey Fowler, who joins us as an entrepreneur. Abbey, you have a unique circumstance when it comes to race. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I have a daughter who's 11 years old, going into 5th grade at Lakeside Elementary in East Grand Rapids. And she is adopted from the Congo, so she's a black little girl in a fully white community, and we deal with that all the time.
Sure. Omar Hall, you are in sales in the automotive industry. You are a resident of Ada. Tell us a little bit about why you're here today.
What brought me here was actually work. I've been in the community now for 5 years. I work for a local manufacturer by the name of Inc. As VP of Sales and Marketing. So I've been in the community now for a little bit over 5 years, and so that's what brought me here.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. As I stated, one of the things that we wanted to do from Cascade Community Foundation's perspective was protect the anonymity of those that were submitting questions. The whole reason for that has nothing to do with fear or being scared or really wanted to protect their identity for any other reason than we wanted them to actually ask full in-depth questions and not feel like they're going to get trapped in the, I don't want to sound silly or stupid or uneducated. So it was very important to us to provide that. On the same thread, we are filming this on Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. Our viewers will see this on Thursday morning, August 20th. And there was a reason that we wanted to do that as well, was to protect your responses and make sure that you are going to fully expose the truth and experiences that you're going through. Having a live audience can sometimes dampen that. You pull your punches or you restrict what you want to say because the same reason. You don't want to sound silly. You don't want the tone to come off a certain way. So I have here 21 questions. We're going to start to ask these. I've not changed these questions in any kind of way. That was very important. We're presenting these questions in their raw form. We're going to jump through those. It might come off a little clunky at times, but we're going to just dive right into some of these. If you guys are ready, I'm just going to start off right from the top. And let's ask this starting with Ken. Ken, what are the top 2 or 3 actions the white community could do in the short term to help address racial prejudice in the Cascade Ada community, understanding we need to start somewhere?
All right, thank you for that question. And before I answer that, I want to thank my neighbor, Richard. It was actually a dialogue that he and I had that led to this platform, and I want to thank the Cascade Community Foundation for bringing this platform together so that we can have maximum efficacy as we have this conversation. So for me, I would answer that question. Let's just start by having dialogue. So top 2 or 3 things. I do facilitation for a living, and one of the things that I always tell people when I facilitate, when they're learning a new concept, is discernment. So in this day and age, when we're having conversations right now, I think it will be safe to assume that at some point in time, conversations around race come up. And so to be able to speak to the elephant in the room, to make that one step, will be the first thing to do. Don't be afraid to have the conversation, is a recommendation that I have. Or if something is not resonating with you, you want to know more, using that discernment if you have a relationship there. I'll use my neighbor Richard as an example. He had a question and he asked me, and then it led to this discussion. So, don't be afraid to have that conversation if the space allows that to step out. And then the other thing is to kind of be prepared to answer those questions and realize that things might not be the way you see it, and that's okay. It's just different. And something that's different than you, it's not wrong, it's just different. So sometimes we ask questions and like, hey, why do you do a certain thing a certain way? And I'll give my perspective, and someone will say, oh, I'd never do that. So kind of minimize that. And I have some terms. One of those could be bias, implicit bias or unconscious bias. And to say, let me use this as a learning opportunity and not a opportunity to minimize something.
Omar, I'm going to kick over to you. And these are the kind of questions that I really liked coming through, because the fact that somebody might have been fearful to even ask it, this is a very basic, easy question, but how do we refer to people of color? Black, African American, people of color, etc. I always feel uncomfortable thinking I will use the wrong term. Can you address that?
My initial thought is to refer to us by name. My name is Omar. I just happen to be an African American male, right? But if that's something that you want to do, I would tell you that it doesn't matter. We've been referred to as being Black, African American. It doesn't matter. But if you're coming from a genuine spot, refer to me as Omar, or Ken, or or Justin, or Richard. Whatever the case may be. It's that simple. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. Well, are you African American? Are you Black? Depending on if it's Monday or Tuesday. No, I'm Omar every day, and it's okay to refer to me as that. Once you get over the fact that I am Black or African American.
Sure. So what I'm hearing is, in certain contexts, there might be a need to refer to somebody's race or ethnicity, and what I'm hearing is, you don't really have an opinion on it. Yeah, okay. And there's not a political correctness issue in this, right? Okay, very good. Let's move right along. Here's a question that was submitted. We are white parents with white children living in a very white community. What can we do to ensure our children have opportunities to interact and develop relationships with people of color? So, Abby, I'm going to direct this to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think there's two important things you have to remember as a parent, and it's all coming from you. You're setting the environment that kid lives in. You are not your community. That's up to you. And you are also leading them by example. So when you have a small child and you're buying books for them or baby dolls or whatever, present diversity right away. And if you have a 3-year-old that is used to just seeing white people in books and white dolls and white Barbies or whatever, they're going to look at another kid in the grocery store and be like, what's wrong with their skin? Because they don't see that. I was raised in a very white community in a rural town, and my mom was just amazing at bringing that. I had a black Cabbage Patch doll and Chinese Barbies, and we had African and Chinese and different kinds of art on the walls. And in my world, I was raised diverse, even though the people around me weren't. And that's up to you as a parent. And then as they grow, you have to continue that diversity as they grow. And if you say, I'm in a white community, then leave the white community and go to a park outside of your normal area. Go to the Grand Rapids Public Library. They have tons of diverse programming there. There's so many opportunities for kids that you just have to look outside of that bubble that you're in. When you go to Chicago, don't just go to the Shed Aquarium, go to the Martin Luther King Museum and teach your kids history and like an understanding for, here's what has happened, and we have to understand it and not talk about it. And then also, and when I said like leading by example, if you're walking down the sidewalk and you're holding your daughter's hand, and there's a black man that comes, and you like hold your daughter's hand tighter and you move away, you're showing that child fear right there. So you have to understand your own biases and let those go when you're around your kids and teach better.
You referenced something interesting to me when you mentioned books with people of multiple ethnicities represented as the characters in the books. Ken, I started out with you with asking, a couple of ways that we can make changes. Is that one of the ways, is introducing multi-ethnicity in the books, in the products that we sell? I mean, we all know how powerful capitalism and the market can be. Is that one of the potential ways to move forward in this?
Yes, one of many. Word I would use is intentionality, and I think it was alluded to. So how do you have these experiences? And it does stop. So the mind is a fascinating tool, if you will. And if you don't have categories for something, you try to fit it into categories out there. So that's a deeper discussion about unconscious bias. But I would say intentionality, and my panelists here alluded to it. Where do you shop? Can you drive 3 miles further, 4 miles further, and shop somewhere different? What plays or shows do you go to think about different? What just to get a cultural experience. And so we're talking about a large collective piece. And I would say I would never minimize a race discussion or a diversity discussion to a potluck, but food sometimes starts the conversation. So what restaurant can I try? I've been passing this restaurant for years, never went in there, just to get my mind open to a different culture. COVID notwithstanding, this community has a large amount of diverse festivals that we can attend just to bring about some awareness to do that. So, when we bounce back from COVID, there's an African American festival, there's an African festival, there's a Hispanic Heritage Festival. There's a number of things that take place right in our own community that we can take advantage of just to get more awareness.
Sure. Omar, you kind of responded when Ken started to answer that. What's your outlook on this, introducing things that are more multicultural into just our everyday life and purchases and things like that?
And Ken touched right on the word intentional. That's the word that I had in my head. You have to intentionally seek out diversity. And it's to be quite honest with you, it's not just from the white side, it's from the black side too. As an African American male or a black male living in Ada, I have to seek out diversity for my kids. And go the other way in regards to, okay, I don't want them to get comfortable only seeing one thing. I want them to see more. So I have to intentionally make sure that the activities that I involve them in, the books that they read, the toys that they play with, all of these things present them with an opportunity to see a diverse background, because the world is not one thing, it's multiple things. So you have to be intentional, and when Ken said that word, it resonated with me. You have to intentionally seek out these opportunities.
When we think about the role that, in this case, purchases and capitalism and the market plays in this, there's another big, influencer, particularly in West Michigan, and that's the church. In your opinion, let's go right back to you with this, Omar. What role or responsibility maybe does the church play in helping to raise awareness around diversity?
And I like to answer that just by going back to the way I was raised. I was raised in the church, and being in the church, you were always out in the community. You were always out fellowshipping, witnessing, preaching the gospel, talking about the goodness of the Lord. So you were out and you were active and you were seen in the community. And I think that still resonates today. And I think it resonates even more today when you think about everything that is going on, all the polarizing issues that are happening right now. There are individuals that look to the church for guidance. And if that church that you're involved in is not actively providing that guidance, then it's an issue. So I think it's important for the church to be visible in the community, not just the community that they serve, the outer community as well.
Let's ratchet that up a little bit. Is the church in Ada, Cascade, Forest Hills specifically, are you seeing enough from, whether it's the Christian community, which is predominant here, are you seeing enough out of that? Do we need to see more out of that?
Yeah, Justin, thank you for that question. I would take it to give it another lens to look at and add into what Omar said. Let's think about our spheres of influence. And so my answer to that question is not just where we worship, it's where we work, it's where we volunteer, it's where our hobbies are, if we do the hobbies outside of the home, that we have an obligation, if you choose to accept it, to speak up when you see anything that could be construed as deflammatory. So what I mean by that, if I'm at I won't name it, but where I like to do something outside of the home and someone tells a joke that's inappropriate, that's perpetuating a stereotype, speak up. Or if I see something that can be expanded upon, let's diversify, our catering list. Let's diversify. Let's do this, or let's make sure our environment is welcoming. So I would say let's take an individual approach to that and say, where I have spheres of influence, I can make that difference, and I'm willing to speak up for that. And that could be where we work, where we worship, where we play, hobbies, so on and so forth.
I'm going to move on to another topic here, and I'm just going to read this question directly as well. And I appreciate those that submitted the questions in more of a narrative style too. At my house, we don't talk about race. We intentionally correct words that introduce a person's skin color. I don't want my kids to make any conclusions based on race. This was what we were told to emphasize. But now I'm wondering if rather than avoiding it, we should embrace it. Do you think there is greater benefit to outwardly acknowledging it and capturing the benefits of diversity rather than trying to pretend like skin color doesn't exist? I'm so irritated that the goalpost moves so often, and it seems like it's white people moving the goalpost. So what they're getting at is there a benefit to actually talking about it more rather than trying to be politically correct about it by just examining it? So I'm gonna start with Abby on this one.
Sure. I feel like you have to acknowledge skin color just like you would acknowledge if somebody's short or tall or blonde or whatever. And I know that there's a deeper connection to history when it comes to culture and skin color and religion or whatever, but it's not something to ignore at all. It's the problem is when you take that attribute and then generalize it or segregate it from yourself because you look different. And that's what you don't want to do and don't want to see. You want to, in a sense, celebrate everyone's uniqueness and include everyone.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I would add to that, very well stated, Abby. And then I have learned, and I do this for a living, but instead of being color blind, we should be color conscious. And that's a term that I use. And the reason being is you can't minimize. So I've had a lot of well-meaning people, and that's kind of what I got from that question, that are saying, we're all the same. How come we all can't just be the same? Why do we have to do it? And in a way, I could take that as, you're minimizing? Are you saying that I don't exist? Because when I walk into a room, people know that I'm a black male. So I would say we want to be color conscious or color aware and not color blind, because that does validate the importance of everyone that's in the room.
Ken, you shared with me something a couple of weeks ago, in fact, you're not the first one to mention this to me. When you go into a Cascade area grocery store, sometimes, depending on what you wear, sets the tone for how you're treated. What we want to do with Race in the Suburbs in this conversation is better understand what it's like for people of color to live in our community. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that and what's behind that?
Yeah, and I don't mind sharing that. Again, I can only give my perspective, my examples, and I do my best to obliterate stereotypes. But because people form their opinions, conscious sometimes, I'm not naive, sometimes it's conscious, but many times it's subconscious, you get relegated into certain groups. And so in my community, and I do live in Cascade, the grocery store that's closest to my house, I have gone in after work where I have on, slacks and a blazer, and my treatment is different than when I go to that same on a Saturday if I have been working in the yard and I go with jean shorts and a t-shirt. Just, ability to pay, second guessing, may or may not get treatment, but it's happened enough to know that why it's happening. So these are not just isolated incidents, or as I mentioned, and again, I'm not here to attack any institution, or being asked more than one occasion, you must use school of choice because of the schools that my kids go to. And when you kind of hear that every year at a gathering at the school, you must be, busing your kids in from somewhere else, which again, there's nothing wrong with school of choice. However, once I've reiterated that, no, we happen to live in a district, we do that, and you still get the same question. Those are some of the slight burdens. There are other burdens that we carry.
You have a name for those, and I don't know if you coined it, microaggression. Okay, tell the audience a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So when you talk about issues around race, I actually have a whole list of words. There's implicit bias, there's stereotypes, there's microaggressions, there's racial marginalization, there is risk avoidance. The list goes on and on. But a microaggression, what you're asking about, is when there is something that's construed from a racial stereotype that's inflicted upon the individual. And it might not come off as racist, but it still stings nonetheless. So think of it as a paper cut. Ken, you're so articulate for a black guy. Okay, it's a little paper cut. Not sure what they meant, but I felt it. Something else, Ken, you don't strike me as the type of person, that would do this. And then there's another one. So if I endure that same paper cut on the same finger over and over again, at some point in time, I'm going to need to seek medical attention. So a microaggression in itself is just that. It's not so much, it's kind of overt and doing that. But if it continues to cascade, no pun intended, and to manifest itself larger, then it creates a larger instance. So what we're going to do is just bring some awareness to that.
Omar, can you comment a little bit on that as well? I'm sure you've experienced the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Ken said. Passive aggressive is another term I like to use, but I always like to say that weekend Omar looks a lot different than 9 to 5 Omar, right? So if I'm going to the grocery store and I've got my baseball cap on and it's turned to the back and I've got baggy shorts on, I know that I'm going to get some, a second look. Versus if I went in as I'm dressed today, it would no problem, breeze right through. How you doing, sir? Have a good day. Where if it's weekend Omar and I got my ripped T-shirt on and I'm just going in to grab something, it's gonna I might be watched, and that's something that you get used to. It doesn't mean that it's right. It's just something that, as an African American male, as a black male, you get used to it. And when you think about some of the tensions that are happening now, those are reasons why. Those are the 1,000 paper cuts that Ken refers to.
My assumption is that there's a lot of people that do this and they don't even realize they're doing it. And so again, the intention of this isn't to judge, it's to expose. And what you guys are talking about are calluses developing over wounds or scar tissue developing. It doesn't take the pain away from what you experience every time it happens, but it slowly starts to change things. I'm going to go to Abbey real quick, but then I'm going to follow up on that in a second with you two. Abbey, you have a really unique situation because you have an adoptive child who's of color, and you're a white mom. And so I imagine you have your own experiences in this category.
We get some looks. I feel fairly blessed that we're in a community where there are a lot of adoptions in this area, so it's not that off to see. But I understand, and I feel like it's almost like a backhanded compliments. And a white person is thinking that they're giving you a compliment, and it's like they've said, I've heard like, oh, Zoe's lucky she has you guys as white parents for her, and things like that. It's like, that's not right,
Yeah. Wow, that's striking to me, and we're really happy to have you here for these perspectives as well. I'm going to touch on a quick follow-up with and probably all three of you actually. Let's start with Omar. One thing that we like to talk about as a future project at Cascade Community Foundation is around mental health, mental illness, mental health. What you three just described as the paper cut starts to develop anxieties. You start to maybe not go to certain stores, and you might not even know that it's happening, but you're starting to build up your defenses before you walk in the store because you know what kind of looks and comments are coming. Talk about this in the context of mental health a little bit, could you?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, and it's not really funny in that context, but I can't tell you how many times that before I've walked into a certain place that I've actually made sure that I was appropriate, or made sure that I looked a certain way, like, okay, I'm going into this particular establishment in this particular neighborhood, let me just make sure that my appearance is appropriate. And that does lead to the subconscious mind just kind of affecting you. Like, you get tired of it, it starts to weigh on you. Like we talk about, the callus starts to form, things of that nature, but it does lead to mental health issues. I can't get specific about what those are, but it's one of those things where you just get really frustrated that you have to do that. And it goes to the privilege that my white counterparts have, that they don't have to do that, right? It hits right directly to white privilege and what that means in the whole context behind that. You have a privilege that you don't have to do that, where I have to make sure that, if I want to receive a certain type of service, then I have to make sure that I appear a certain type of way.
Abby, same kind of thing to you, because I'm sure you deal with certain anxieties as well.
I don't want to say like I do. I'm not going to say that at all. But my daughter does, and that's where you have to think about how are your children treating each other in school. And that's, of course, where it all starts and everything. But like Zoe, my daughter, will sometimes like have feelings of, oh, I just wish I had white skin, or I wish I could brush my hair, things like that, where she wants to conform because everyone in her school, not everyone, but people in her school, they're kids, they're curious, they're like, why is your hair different, and how do you do your hair, and they think it's really cool sometimes, which is great, and there's compliments, but there's also like, you're different, I want to understand that. And curiosity is good, but it starts at home to give kids the proper way to ask those questions or to understand how people are different. And I don't see a reason why a white kid can't have the same book that celebrates like a little black girl doing and curling her hair or braiding it. I don't see why that can't be in everyone's homes. But also that kind of constant, I can see the callous is a really great word for that. It creates anxiety, it creates distraction for learning, and it's always there for her.
Ken, for you, is there a mental health angle to this that you can acknowledge?
For me, it's an awareness. And what I mean by that is and I can pick up from and identify with Omar's example. I'm a former football player. I always know the down and distance. And what I mean by that is, okay, what's the next play? Okay, am I willing to subject myself to what might happen because I'm going to the store after spending the day at the park versus coming in? If someone encounters, and I'm one that I'll draw attention, I like teachable moments. So I'll give you this example. I've gone to the grocery store. The person in front of me, hey, how are you? Did you find everything you're looking for? Would you like paper or plastic? I get up, they just start slinging my groceries down there. Hey, I'm doing well as well. How are you doing? So usually that snaps the person back, but I don't always have the energy to do that. So on the day I'm coming home from work, I'm as tired as anybody. I just need to pick up a loaf of bread. I really don't want to go into it at the grocery store. So there is that consciousness, and I like you tied it to mental health is because it's do I have the energy to want to do something about this in a positive way? Because the other thing is, and this is my own personal mantra, I don't want to reinforce a negative stereotype. So if I can't do it appropriately, I don't do it.
Justin, if I could add just a quick story and just get back to the mental health piece of it and how we pass these down to our kids. I have an 11-year-old son, and we're starting to loosen the chain, if you will, and kind of let him explore. He's got a bike, he's riding around. So he wanted to go to the store with his buddy, with two of his buddies that are white, his white friends. And my wife and I, we had to sit there and have the conversation with him of, okay, here's how you behave in the store when you go into the store. And he's 11 years old, right? And then you start thinking, am I doing the wrong thing as a parent by, I guess, bringing down those systemic issues or putting those pressures on my son as a young kid who's just going to the store to grab some candy or rip, some type of a sports drink with his two buddies, right? But we actually had to sit there and have that conversation. Okay, you're going to the store, you look different from your two buddies, you're gonna get some more attention than what your friends are probably gonna get. You have to be prepared, and here's how you have to behave, right? So it's an interesting dynamic, and when you think about how that feeds into the mental health side, I mean, am I then pushing that anxiety on my son to say, wow, I can't even go to the store with my buddy. Dad, I just want to ride my bike down to the store. Yeah. It's more than that, unfortunately.
This is truly vulnerability. I mean, what we're talking about is what it is like for people of color to live in this community right here. You guys are experiencing this. Abby, you probably have similar occurrences with your situation of having to prepare your daughter for exactly what Omar is preparing his son for. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, she's very aware of what's going on and asks tons of questions, which I love about her. But we have conversations like, when you drive, when you get a license and you get pulled over, you are going to have to be a little bit more careful because you might be treated differently. And we all like to think that's going to change, but if it doesn't, I'm her mother and I'm here to protect her, so I want to prepare her for those things. And I think too, when it comes to kids, you have to listen to them, and when they have questions, you stop everything and sit down and talk to them. And like, I know life is busy, but these are big topics, and if they show interest, no matter what color or race or religion you are, like, sit down and talk about it. And that's like, those moments in a kid's life are going to be the most prolific because it's coming from you. And then if they can't talk about it, find ways for them to express their feelings. Like my daughter, she has a hard time sometimes too, and then but she loves poetry, so she'll come up with poetry about what's going on and about the riots and things, and it's just her way of expressing it. And so we're constantly like, write more poems, and that's, you just have to be aware of your kid leading that conversation at times.
There's an interesting set of questions that have come up in these. There's a couple of them. Generationally speaking, and one of these questions, I'm not going to read it word for word, but one of these questions is essentially, was it different, Ken and Omar, and we'll start with you, Ken. Was it different for your parents? That's part one, than it is for you, raising children. And two, do you think that the previous generation had it more difficult, the same? Was it about the same? Is it impossible to even rate that or compare those two? But talk about that generational difference of what it's like for you raising kids versus maybe what it was like for your parents.
And again, question is I can give you my life and my answer to that. So even though I lived in Michigan and have for my whole professional career, both of my parents are from the South. And my dad was born in 1937, my mom was born in 1942, so they grew up in a very segregated South. Jim Crow laws, pre-civil rights movement, the whole nine. And my dad chose the Navy as his first career. And so I'm the youngest of four children, and so my dad had the experience. I was born in San Diego, California, but my dad always emphasized, because of his bringing, son, you're gonna have to work twice as hard, all things being equal, to get to the same place. And he also emphasized on all of us to get a college education. So the things that he was not able to do, he made sure we had. So I would argue that, it was better. We were able to start a little bit, if I use a ladder analogy, the rung that I started on was a little bit higher than the rung my dad started on, but it was because of his sacrifice I could start on that rung. But that doesn't mean I haven't encountered overt and direct racism, over my life. But it was because of sacrifices of my dad's generation that I was able to do that. So I would say it's different in that regard, that obviously civil rights has passed and people aren't segregated and like colored bathrooms and things that you see when you look at some of the 1960 stuff. But I would also say that the notion of racism has not left, and people are relegated to certain ways depending upon their race, and that's why we're working to undo some of that.
I'm going to move on to another question. It suddenly seems there's a proliferation of Black Lives Matter signs all over the suburbs. I feel pressure to put one up myself, otherwise everyone might think I'm a racist. How do African Americans really feel about those signs? And I'm going to amend that a little bit to say, how do you feel about the movement in general as well? Let's start with Ken on this one.
Okay. It's interesting. So again, from my opinion, Black Lives Matter. So I'll kind of transition what I do with that work. So that was one of the questions I get. Help me understand Black Lives Matter from people that are genuine. And so I couldn't think of a better analogy than, and I got this off the internet, so it's validated. But no, I thought it was a good analogy. It's kind of like when the tragedy happened during the Boston Marathon a few years back, and there was a hashtag Boston Strong. And when you were using Boston Strong, people in Houston were saying, well, what about us? Or people in Chicago were saying, what about us? No, what they were saying is we're going and aligning with something that experienced a tragedy. So when you hear Black Lives Matter, what we're saying is, because people that look like me have been disproportionately injured, arrested by police, doing things, we want to draw attention to that. So it is not a racist statement. We're not saying other lives don't matter. What we're saying is Black lives matter, to draw attention to the thing. So I think sometimes people get caught up in whatever is revolving around that, to think that it's something that it isn't. But what we're doing is drawing attention to that all lives matter, but we want to, draw special attention to Black lives matter because we're dying at an alarming high rate. So that's my take on that statement.
Sure. Omar?
Only thing I would add is that, listen, the sign it doesn't mean anything. Just because your neighbors are putting up a sign that says all lives matter, or here's what we believe in this house, we believe that all lives matter. If you're feeling pressure to put a sign up, then you're doing it for the wrong reason. You don't need a sign broadcasting Black Lives Matter to say that you support the movement. So you can support, you can offer support, you can believe that. If it's about a sign, then I think you got the wrong approach to it.
If it was a different sign.
What do you mean by that?
If it was another sign, the questioning it. So again, we're staying apolitical, in this. But if there was anything you were going to put in your eye, do you ask yourself the same question? Whether it was, whatever, my son is in the band. I see a lot of those, lacrosse. You don't question that. So again, I would just say, what is the hesitation or the motivation behind, the sign you put up there and why you're doing it? And that should be your answer.
Okay. Several years ago, Cascade Township held a public hearing in which the issue of paying for very limited bus service was discussed. At the time, major employers along 28th Street were desperate for employees, and transportation was an issue to get them back to work, One Cascade resident stood up vehemently against supporting bus service, as she did not want, quote, those people, end quote, in her community. Years later, I'm embarrassed I didn't respond then or later, but even after all this time, I don't know what I would say. How can I respond to comments like this? Can I kick this to you, Abby?
I feel like it, like what you said earlier, you're always aware of what people are saying, and you're there to help correct them when they are off. And even, I have friends who are not racist, but they'll say something and in a way that segregates, their color. And I'm like, oh, let's change the verbiage just a little bit. Like, I know you're not racist, but that's kind of a racist thing to say. And it's education, and I think that's what it's important, is just education.
Omar, any comment on those people busing in from the city?
I think part of getting over racism is just having the courage to stand up, right? And even though that was a missed opportunity by the person that asked that question, anytime those people, those type of comments are made, it's really about having the courage to stand up and offer correctness. Because you also too have to put yourself in the mindset of somebody that's trying to improve their situation, somebody that's trying to better themselves, and they have to take a job that's all the way out in Cascade or all the way out in Ada, and they may need that bus line. They're not coming here to skew the numbers or to increase the diversity population. They're coming here to work, and it's just unfortunate for them that they have to catch a bus to go all the way down 28th Street and then catch a bus to go all the way back out to their community. So you have to take a step back, put yourself in the mind of that individual that says, listen, I have an opportunity for work. That work happens to be all the way out in Cascade, all the way out in Ada, and the only way that I can get there is by catching this bus. And to deal with the other noise of, well, I don't want that person in my community, or I don't want you people in my community, I think it's the wrong mindset.
Yep.
Justin, can I add to that?
Absolutely,
too? I agree with my panelist, but two things that I wanted to add to that. And the first one is there are layers to this. And what I mean by layers is, and I'm just going off my personal examples, I would never really judge someone on their race or their gender. But if those people could just do better, we're talking about socioeconomics. You got to ride the bus, you got to do this, So what do we mean? So I would just say, think about the layers to our biases. And then the other thing to that is, if the person that asked that question is like me, sometimes you're presented with a situation and then on the way home or the next morning, like, oh, I should have said this, or I would have said this. take that mental note, because chances are you'll get another opportunity in the future to speak up to a similar situation. But when you encounter that situation, some tips that someone might have would be to appeal to their higher principle. You strike me as a pretty level-headed person. What's making you say something like that? Usually that brings the person back to reality. You don't want to call them out and say, oh, that was an ignorant statement, because then their barriers go up. But if you appeal to their higher principle, or just ask that open question, what do you mean by that? Tell me more about that. And usually that will ground a person back to if they were kind of getting out of the parameters of thinking logically to do that. So that's just a few tips that I have when dealing with questions like that.
Yeah, so Richard Robbins, who was on with us a little bit ago, he mentions a lot when we talk about this around education and just lifting, public discourse on this topic. And you started to tap into it's how you say it, it's how you would correct somebody, because you don't want their defenses to come up. I'm going to read this question, but that's kind of the context that I think I hear it a lot too, and I don't correct people as much as I should. But I hear it, and a lot of times in my mind, I'm thinking, if we could get over this portion of this, the conversation would completely change. It would go beyond race. So let me read this. There's no way to avoid offending people. I get offended all the time. I'm working on it, trust me. But how much of what you hear is racist comments versus naive human conversation? How do you separate ignorance from the bias? So let's hand that to you, Ken.
And actually, that's a good question. And there's that fine line of straddling things, and then it gets convoluted because we get images from the media, from music, the movies that we watch. So what might be funny in a movie show or a movie or TV show that you watch might be offensive if you said it publicly, but yet you still watch the TV show. And so where do you say that? And so my answer to that question, again, and this goes back to one, discernment. Is it appropriate? Is it that they, something? How's it being received? Who's the audience? But at the same time, I would say, where is our own litmus test? And that's where the individual comes in. So yeah, I can laugh and joke with anyone, but at the same time, I think we can do that without being offensive. And so that's where I draw the line, and that's where I use my own discernment when I would say, and I have the right word, the proper response techniques to tell someone, hey, okay, you're kind of going a little further there. Let's do this. Let's kind of keep it, G-rated or whatever the case may be. In this case, we won't go there. So that's my answer. But I would say to an individual, you kind of know what's going on. Use your discernment when you want to feel that it's something getting offensive.
Abby, when you hear these things, you referenced hearing these things as well. Are you hearing racist comments, or are you just hearing naive human conversation?
Both, and I think the racist comments aren't often meant to harm as much as they do. I think also you have to think about where is your information coming from. The bias is media and news right now also. And if you're getting your news from one source, then you're not seeing the whole picture. And so when somebody comes to me and says, well, but this and this, then I'm not a confrontational person, but I'll look up an article that will show them the whole picture, and then I'll send it to them and say, yeah, but you should read more about this too.
Omar, I'm going to direct the same question to you. Is it racist comments or naive human conversation?
Yeah, I think it's honestly a little bit of both, and I think you have to have, as Ken mentioned, what's your discernment, right? And you have to take the opportunity to educate the individual, correct them, and it doesn't have to be in a confrontational way. It doesn't have to be in a political way. It's just, here's why what you said was could be seen as a little bit offensive, and it could it could be in a laughing matter. Man, that was so racist what you just said, and here's why. Or that that was so offensive. Or if you said that in the wrong setting, that would be so offensive. So I mean, if you're amongst your friends, it's an easier conversation to have. But if it's somebody that you just met, I mean, you have to figure out what how to take that opportunity to correct that person, and then understand where it's coming from. Where is it coming from? Why?
The three of you bring up something that I think is pretty important. As playing an educator in a normal conversation with somebody where you're being exposed to this, you are taking on this role of correcting them. That's got to be exhausting. I mean, as we talk about what it's like for people of color in this community, that's got to be exhausting, is it not?
It takes a toll. You have to be prepared for it. I choose to take on that challenge and do it to the best of my ability. And even going back to that question, I thought of this after my panelists spoke: impact versus intent. And the intent could have been benign, but it had a deeper impact. And so I think sometimes to draw someone's attention to that. You didn't mean it negatively, or you said it out of lack of understanding, but let me tell you how it made me feel, or this group feel, or those people feel. So I think it's important to bring that to people's attention.
Exhausting, Omar?
Yeah, it can be, for sure. But when you make the choice to be a community champion, right, it's one of those things that comes with it. I mean, we all had options to move into other communities, right? I mean, we made the choice to move into a community that we thought was a great community. And part of that burden that you carry as being a minority in that community is educating your peers, or educating your neighbors, or that's part of forming a relationship. How can you be a good neighbor and not educate your neighbor on the things that you find offensive? I find it offensive that you park on my lawn every time you have a party. That's a conversation that you're okay to have with your neighbor if they constantly do it. So why is it any different about race? So that's kind of my perspective on it.
We're going to end with this question. I'm going to ask it to all three of you. Can someone provide a template for, quote, how to do this right? What does success look like? To clarify, what is the appropriate next step for a small, largely white community? And I'll start with Ken.
All right. Thank you. So my answer to that question would be making steps in the right direction and to sustain it. I don't think any of these discussions can be the flavor of the day. We got some things going on nationally. There's systemic racism. We're going to talk about it during the month of August, and when we're done, check the box, been there, done that. I think it has to be, now we have this heightened level of awareness. What do we have to do to keep it going on? So I would say there is no magic recipe. I would say we can look at some best practices and some lessons learned, but we're unique enough as West Michigan, as Grand Rapids suburbs, to have our own, approach to this, but it has to be something that's ongoing if we're going to make a real change.
Abby, is there a template for success in your opinion?
I wish that there was, but I'm focused on children and parenting, so I would say it starts there. Don't be afraid to correct your children and lead by example. Don't be afraid to correct other children. Also, this is a village, this is a community, and it takes a village to raise a good, strong community that is open-minded.
Omar, what are the steps that we begin to take in this community?
Right. I think Abby touched on it. It takes a village. I think you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I think we used a word earlier called intentionality. You have to be intentional about it. There's a lot of influence in this community. This community is full of influence. It's full of individuals that could be outstanding community champions and could be the voice or the beacon for change. I think you have to really want to do that, and you have to really be intentional and really just be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Well, thank you to all three for having this conversation. I appreciate the vulnerability and the position that you put yourself in. I think the dialogue that you presented today goes a long way in really showcasing what it is truly like for people of color, people in unique, diverse circumstances, to live in Cascade, Ada, Forest Hills. I'm sure these will mimic other communities out there. For those of you that are watching, we want to be in touch with those communities. We want to make sure that we're setting up opportunities for more Q&As to be had. And we're going to be here to be helpful for that. You're going to find other conversations around race in the suburbs soon, coming from Cascade Community Foundation, as well as a myriad of other topics that we feel it's important to start to uncover and start to expose some light on. If this is something that you're really interested in, we need to hear from you. If community Q&A, race in the suburbs, taking action steps with this particular topic or other topics is important to you, we need to hear from you. We also need your support. You can go onto our website at cascadecommunityfoundation.com to line up ways that you can support our foundation. We are here to serve the geography of Cascade, Ada, Forest Hills, really the Forest Hills Area School District, but our aim and intent doesn't end there. As we started, I mentioned that we want to be a pinprick into the heart of some of the social problems that we're facing. It doesn't start and end with race. It's into healthcare, it's into religion, it's into, like I said, a myriad of other areas. We need your support to continue to do that. And so please give some consideration to that. In the meantime, you can find this on our website. You can find this on our alternate website, raceinthesuburbs.org. Please share that. Take some time to get this broadcast out there to others. If you feel there's somebody in your neighborhood, somebody in your family that needs to watch this, if you're looking for a template of success, these people will all tell you there isn't one. But this is a pretty good start, and we need to get your questions. So we've left the anonymous question portal open for you to continue submitting your questions, and we'll do our best to continue answering those and getting back to you. On behalf of our board of directors at Cascade Community Foundation, and on behalf of our community partners that support the work just like this, I want to thank you all for lining up and being a part of this. I want to thank once again our panelists. Again, my name is Sn.1. I'm the CEO of Cascade Community Foundation. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for joining us.